In the vast expanse of the Galactic Council's domain, where thousands of species coexist under the banner of unity and progress, there exists an unspoken truth that chills even the most hardened diplomats. Some beings are too dangerous, too unpredictable, too wrong to belong anywhere in civilized space. Kale Vorthak learned this truth at the age of 7, when the Reptilian High Command cast him out for carrying human DNA. He learned it again at 12, when the Human Colonial Authority refused him entry for his scaled skin and predator's eyes. For 30 years, he has drifted between worlds, belonging to none, wanted by no one, a living reminder of a forbidden union that should never have been. But in the darkest corners of space, where pirates prey on the innocent and slavers hunt for fresh cargo, KL has become something else entirely. Something that makes hardened criminals wake screaming from nightmares. Something that causes entire pirate fleets to change course at the mere mention of his name. The galaxy rejected him for being neither fully human nor fully reptile. They never stopped to consider what happens when you combine human ingenuity with reptilian ruthlessness, human empathy with reptilian patience, human apathy with reptilian strength. Now, as an ancient evil stirs in the void between stars, something that has devoured entire civilizations, the very species that cast him out find themselves facing extinction. The Galactic Council's mighty fleets crumble like paper before this cosmic horror. Their greatest warriors fall like children before an unstoppable force. And in their darkest hour, as hope fades and worlds burn, they will learn that sometimes salvation comes not from the pure and accepted, but from the outcast who never forgot what it means to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. This is the story of Kale Vorthak, the half-breed they all rejected, the monster they all feared, and the hero none of them deserved. The galaxy is about to discover what happens when humanity finally steps forward to claim one of its own. The salvage ship Broken Chain drifted through the debris field like a ghost haunting the graveyard of titans. Twisted metal and scorched hull fragments stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction, all that remained of the Galactic Council's Third Fleet. Admiral Kresh's flagship alone had been larger than some moons, carrying 50,000 souls and enough firepower to crack continents. Now it existed only as a slowly expanding cloud of atomized particles and regret. Kale Vorthak stood on the bridge of his vessel, his reptilian eyes scanning the destruction with an expression that would have been unreadable to most species. The scaled ridges above his brows caught the pale light from dying reactor cores, while his too human mouth remained set in a grim line. At 6'8", he towered over most humanoids, his frame carrying the perfect balance of human flexibility and reptilian power. His skin shifted between deep emerald and bronze depending on the light, marked with scars that told the story of 3 decades surviving where others died. "Captain," came a voice from behind him. Zara Chen, his human communications officer, approached with careful steps. She was one of the few who had served with him long enough to read the subtle signs of his moods, the slight flattening of his pupils when angry, the almost imperceptible tilt of his head when thinking. "We're receiving broadcasts from 17 different worlds. They're all saying the same thing." Kale didn't turn around. "Show me." The main display flickered to life, showing a blue-skinned Andorian news anchor whose typically composed demeanor was cracked with barely controlled terror. The entity consumed the entire Kepler system in less than 6 hours. No survivors, no debris. Nothing remains but empty space where 4 billion souls once lived. The Galactic Council has declared a state of emergency and is recalling all fleets to the transmission cut to static. Zara's fingers danced over her controls, pulling up another signal. This time, a crystalline Threnodai spokesperson appeared, their translucent form shimmering with stress patterns. "Cannot be reasoned with. Cannot be stopped. The Void Devourers have returned after 10,000 years of slumber, and our weapons are useless against them. They consume not just matter, but the very essence of static again." Zara pulled up a third broadcast, this one from the reptilian homeworld of Sethrak Prime. High Commander Vostai appeared on screen, her ceremonial scales polished to mirror brightness despite the chaos evident in the command center behind her. All colonial expeditions are hereby terminated. All citizens are to return to core worlds immediately. The hybrid abomination known as KL Vorthek is specifically forbidden from approaching Sethrak space. His presence would only bring further shame to Kale raised one clawed hand and Zara cut the feed. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support and the distant pinging of their sensors cataloging debris. Void Devourers, Kale said finally, his voice carrying the careful pronunciation of one who had studied ancient texts in a dozen dead languages. I thought that was just mythology. Apparently not, Zara replied softly. She had been with him for 8 years, ever since he'd pulled her from a slaver ship in the Outer Rim. She was one of the few humans who had ever looked at him without fear or disgust, just professional respect tinged with something that might have been friendship. The reports are all consistent. Something emerged from the void between galaxies 3 weeks ago. It's not just destroying worlds. It's erasing them from existence entirely. Kale's reflection in the viewport showed a face that belonged fully to neither of his parent species. His features were too angular for human standards, too soft for reptilian ones. His eyes held depths that spoke of intelligence inherited from humanity's greatest thinkers, and patience learned from creatures who lived for centuries. When he was young, before the universe taught him better, he had dreamed of bridging the gap between species, of becoming living proof that cooperation was possible. The galaxy had taught him otherwise. "Captain," another voice called from the navigation station. Marcus Webb, a grizzled former military man whose court-martial for refusing an illegal order had led him to Kale's crew. "We've got company, incoming. 3 ships, military configuration. They're not broadcasting AFF signals." Kale moved to the tactical display with the fluid grace that marked his hybrid nature. The approaching vessels registered as Galactic Council destroyers, sleek, deadly ships designed to bring overwhelming firepower to any engagement. Their weapon systems were already charging. "Range?" he asked. 60,000 kilometers and closing. "They'll be in firing range in 4 minutes." "Hail them!" Kale ordered. Zara's hands moved over her console. Channel open, but they're not responding. On the tactical display, the lead destroyer's forward batteries began to glow with the telltale energy signature of charged plasma cannons. Kale studied the formation with eyes that had learned to read death in 1,000 different configurations. 3 ships approaching in a standard attack pattern, weapons hot but not yet firing. They wanted something. "This is Captain Vortak of the salvage vessel Broken Chain." He transmitted on all frequencies. "You are approaching a legitimate salvage operation in unclaimed space. State your intentions." The response came not in words but in the form of 3 missile locks painting his ship. Kale's lips drew back slightly, revealing teeth that were neither fully human nor fully reptilian. Something altogether more dangerous than either. "Interesting," he murmured. "Marcus, analysis of their approach vector?" The navigator's scarred face was grim. "They're not here to arrest us, Captain. B. This is a termination run. Standard Council hunter-killer formation, designed to prevent any possibility of escape." Kale nodded slowly. He had expected this day would come eventually. For 30 years, he had been careful to avoid council space, to take only jobs that kept him in the ungoverned sectors where his mixed heritage was just another curiosity among pirates and smugglers. But the Void Devourer's return had apparently changed the calculus. Someone had decided that with the galaxy facing extinction, they couldn't afford to leave any loose ends alive. "They're here to kill me," he said simply. "The question is why now?" Zara's console chimed. "Sir, I'm picking up an encrypted transmission from the lead ship. It's on a human military frequency, one that was classified above my clearance level when I served in the Colonial Navy." "Let me hear it." The voice that emerged from the speakers was crisp, professional, and entirely human. Unknown vessel, you are harboring the genetic abomination designated Kale Vorthak. Surrender the target for immediate termination, and your crew will be permitted to evacuate in life pods before your ship is destroyed. Kale felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear. He had moved beyond such simple emotions decades ago. But recognition. That's a human colonial authority accent. Earth Command, specifically. The humans are working with the Council? Marcus asked, disbelief coloring his voice. It seems my mother's people have finally decided I'm too dangerous to ignore, Kale replied. His voice held no bitterness. He had used up his capacity for that particular emotion years ago. Zara, open a channel to the lead ship. Sir, if you're planning to surrender, I'm not. Kale's eyes had taken on a predatory quality that made even his loyal crew shift uncomfortably. I'm planning to remind them why they should have killed me 30 years ago instead of just casting me out. The channel opened. Kale spoke clearly, his voice carrying across space to the ships that had come to end him. This is Kale Vorthak. I assume you have orders to terminate me with extreme prejudice. Before you attempt to carry out those orders, you should know that I've spent the last 3 decades studying every aspect of Galactic Council and human colonial authority military doctrine. I know how you think, I know how you fight, and I know how you die. There was a pause before the human voice responded. You're outnumbered 3-1 by ships that outmass and outgun you by a factor of 20. Surrender now, and we'll make it quick. Counter-proposal, Kale said, and his crew could hear the deadly calm that preceded every one of his most dangerous decisions. Turn around and leave. Because what's coming for the galaxy? What you're apparently so afraid of that you're willing to murder a salvage captain in neutral space, it's going to require every ship, every warrior, and every advantage you can get, including me. The abomination thinks it can help, another voice cut in. Older, more cultured, with the distinctive harmonic undertones of a Galactic Council admiral. How typically human arrogance. Very well. You have 30 seconds to abandon ship before we reduce you to component atoms. Kale looked at his crew, humans, aliens, misfits, and outcasts who had found purpose serving under a captain who understood what it meant to be unwanted. Opinions? I've seen what you can do when someone threatens your people, Zara said quietly. My money's on the ship with the hybrid who survived 30 years of everyone trying to kill him. Marcus nodded grimly. Besides, where else are we going to go? The whole galaxy's going to hell. Kale smiled, and for the first time in days, it reached his reptilian eyes. In that case, let's show them what happens when you corner something that's already lost everything. His hands moved over the control panel with inhuman speed and precision. The broken chain had been built as a salvage vessel, but Kale had modified her extensively over the years. Hidden weapon systems came online. Stealth generators that existed in violation of 17 different treaties began to hum with power, and in the ship's cargo bay, something much more dangerous than weapons began to awaken. All ships fire at will, came the order from the Council fleet. Space lit up with plasma fire and missile contrails, but where the broken chain had been, there was now only empty space and sensor shadows. Where did they go? The human captain's voice carried a note of confusion that was about to become terror. The answer came from directly behind the lead destroyer, where Kale's ship had somehow appeared without crossing the intervening space. The broken chain's weapons were not standard armaments. They were artifacts recovered from dead civilizations, technologies that the major powers had either forgotten or been too afraid to use. The first shot went through the destroyer's shields as if they weren't there. The second carved through armor that was supposed to withstand direct hits from capital ship weapons. The third found the reactor core. As the destroyer's death screams echoed across subspace frequencies, Kale's voice cut through the chaos with inhuman calm. 2 ships remain. I've just demonstrated that your weapons cannot touch me and your shields cannot protect you. I'm going to give you one more chance to leave. The response was predictable. The remaining ships opened fire with everything they had. Plasma bolts, kinetic rounds, and guided missiles filled the space where the broken chain had been. But KL was no longer there. His ship moved like a living thing, dancing between incoming fire with impossible grace. The second destroyer died when Kale's ship somehow materialized inside its hangar bay and detonated something that turned the entire vessel into a brief, bright star. The third ship's captain showed wisdom and jumped to hyperspace before Kale could demonstrate whatever horror he had planned for them. In the sudden quiet, the broken chain became visible again, hanging motionless among the debris of two ships that had come to kill him. Kale stood on his bridge, staring out at the wreckage, and for a moment allowed himself to feel the weight of what had just happened. The galaxy was facing extinction from an enemy that consumed entire star systems, and instead of seeking help wherever they could find it, they had sent ships to kill the one being who had spent 30 years learning to survive impossible odds. "Sir," Sara said softly, "what do we do now?" Kale was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a decision that would change the course of the war to come, set course for Earth. "It's time I had a conversation with the species that gave me half my DNA and all of my conscience. Sir, Earth is in the heart of human colonial space. They'll have fleets waiting for us. I'm counting on it." Kale's eyes had taken on the quality of obsidian, hard, sharp, and completely without mercy. "Because it's time someone explained to my mother's people exactly what they created when they cast out their own blood." The broken chain turned toward the heart of human space, carrying its hybrid captain toward a confrontation 30 years in the making. Behind them, the debris of the Third Fleet continued its eternal dance among the stars, a testament to the galaxy's failure to understand the enemy that was coming for them all. And in the vast darkness between stars, something ancient and hungry felt the stirrings of conflict and smiled with a mouth that could swallow suns. The Earth's defense grid was the most sophisticated military installation in human space, a network of orbital platforms, automated defense stations, and patrol fleets designed to protect humanity's birth world from any conceivable threat. For 3 centuries, nothing hostile had penetrated more than a light year into the system without being reduced to cosmic dust. That perfect record was about to be tested by something the designers had never considered: a single ship carrying the child they had all agreed to forget. Admiral Sarah Morrison stood in the command center of Defense Platform Alpha, her weathered face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays showing the approaching vessel. At 62, she had commanded the Earth defense grid for over a decade, overseeing humanity's protection through 3 separate alien conflicts and countless minor incursions. She had never faced anything like this. "Contact is maintaining steady approach vector," reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the sensor station. "With Trust Teddy, speed is exactly at the threshold for non-aggressive intent. But sir, the energy signatures we're detecting don't match anything in our databases." "Explain," Morrison ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to project calm even when facing the impossible. "The ship appears to be running on technologies that predate the Galactic Council by millennia. Some of these readings suggest systems that shouldn't be theoretically possible. And sir," Torres hesitated, "the ship is almost certainly armed with weapons that could punch through our shields like paper." Morrison studied the tactical display. The approaching vessel was small by military standards, roughly the size of a heavy cruiser, but the energy patterns it was generating suggested power levels that should have required a Dreadnought-class reactor. More disturbing were the quantum signatures that seemed to phase in and out of normal space, technology that the best human scientists insisted was purely theoretical. "Have we received any response to our hails?" "Negative, sir. The ship has maintained communication silence since entering the system." But Torres looked up from his console with an expression of confusion. "Sir, I'm picking up a transmission. It's not coming from their communications array. It's being broadcast directly into subspace using a method I've never seen before. Put it through." The speakers crackled with static, and then a voice emerged that made Morrison's blood run cold. It was deep, carrying hints of inhuman resonance but unmistakably human in its cadence and emotion. "Earth Defense Command, This is Captain Kale Vorthak requesting permission to approach your homeworld. I believe you have some questions for me, and I have some answers you're not going to want to hear." The bridge fell silent. Morrison had read the classified files. Every officer above the rank of colonel had been required to study the reports from 30 years ago, the failed genetic experiment, the hybrid child that the colonial authority had deemed too dangerous to keep and too valuable to kill, the decision to simply pretend he had never existed. "Sir," whispered Commander Hayes, Morrison's second-in-command, "our orders were to terminate on sight if he ever returned to human space." Morrison nodded grimly. Those orders had come directly from Earth Command with the highest classification levels. But she was also aware of the reports that had been filtering in from across the galaxy over the past month. The Void Devourers had consumed 14 star systems in 3 weeks. Every fleet sent against them had been annihilated without managing to inflict any detectable damage. Humanity was facing extinction along with every other species in the galaxy. "Sir," Taurus called out, his voice tight with alarm, "I'm reading massive power buildup throughout the defense grid. Someone's bringing all systems online for full combat engagement." Morrison's expression hardened. "I didn't give that order. It's coming directly from Earth Command, sir. Admiral Blackwood's authorization codes." Morrison felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Admiral Marcus Blackwood was the head of human colonial intelligence, a man who had been present at the original decision to exile Kale Vorthak. If he was taking direct control of the situation, it meant that the hybrid's return represented a threat that went beyond simple military concerns. "Sir, the hybrid ship has stopped," Taurus reported. "It's holding position just outside the defense grid's engagement range." On the main display, the alien-looking vessel hung motionless against the starfield. It was beautiful in a predatory way, its hull configured in flowing lines that seemed to shift and change as she watched. Nothing in its posture suggested aggression, but Morrison had spent enough time studying xenobiology to recognize the stillness of an apex predator waiting to see if its prey would run or fight. "Admiral Morrison." The voice from the speakers was calm, conversational, carrying just a hint of amusement. "I can hear your defense systems powering up. Every gun in the system is now trained on my ship. Are you planning to open fire on a vessel that hasn't committed any hostile acts?" Morrison stepped closer to the communications console. "Kale Vorthak, you are in violation of human colonial space. You have been designated a security risk and are ordered to surrender immediately." "I see." There was a pause, and when the voice returned, it carried a note of something that might have been sadness. "Admiral, how many ships has humanity lost to the Void Devourers?" The question caught Morrison off guard. "That information is classified. I'll take that as a lot. Let me guess, every engagement has resulted in total loss. No survivors, no useful intelligence, no evidence that human weapons have any effect whatsoever." Morrison exchanged glances with her senior staff. The accuracy of that assessment was classified at levels that should have been impossible for a civilian salvage captain to access. "How do you know that?" she asked. "Because I've spent the last month studying their attack patterns and capabilities." "Admiral, I didn't come here to threaten Earth. I came here because humanity is going to be extinct within 6 months, unless someone finds a way to fight something that eats entire star systems for breakfast. And like it or not, I might be the only person in this galaxy who has the necessary combination of human ingenuity and alien perspective to figure out how." "Sir," Commander Hayes whispered urgently, "I'm receiving new orders from Admiral Blackwood. We're to engage immediately with all available firepower. No questions, no surrender, no prisoners." Morrison stared at the tactical display. The hybrid ship showed no signs of raising shields or charging weapons. It simply hung there, waiting. A target that any of her gun platforms could vaporize in seconds, but she had also read the intelligence reports about what had happened to the 3 destroyers that had tried to terminate Kale Vorthak in the debris field of the Third Fleet. 2 ships had been completely destroyed by weapons that shouldn't have existed. The third had fled rather than face whatever the hybrid had planned for them. "Sir, Admiral Blackwood is demanding immediate compliance with termination orders," Torres reported. "Dear Admiral Blackwood, that I'm experiencing communication difficulties," Morrison replied. "Kale Vorthak, you claim you can help humanity survive this crisis. Prove it." The response came not in words, but in a demonstration that made Morrison's blood freeze. Every sensor array in the Earth defense grid suddenly went blind. Every targeting computer lost lock. Every weapons platform found itself aiming at empty space. For 30 terrifying seconds, Earth's most sophisticated military installation was completely defenseless. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the effect ended. Sensors came back online. Targeting systems reacquired their lock on the hybrid ship. But the message was unmistakably clear. Kale Vorthak could have destroyed every defensive platform in the system in those 30 seconds. Instead, he had simply demonstrated that he could. "Admiral," his voice returned, now carrying a harder edge, "I just showed you a fraction of what I learned during 30 years of surviving in a galaxy that wanted me dead. The technologies I've mastered, the weapons I've acquired, the knowledge I've accumulated, all of it could be used to help humanity survive what's coming. Or it could be used to ensure that when the Void Devourers arrive, they find Earth completely defenseless." Morrison felt sweat gathering at the base of her skull. "Are you threatening us? I'm offering you a choice. The same choice every species in this galaxy is going to face very soon. You can continue to treat me as the enemy and waste time and resources trying to kill someone who has spent 3 decades learning to survive impossible odds. Or you can accept that maybe, just maybe, the genetic experiment you cast out 30 years ago has become exactly the weapon you need to fight an enemy that conventional military doctrine can't touch." On the tactical display, new contacts were appearing at the edge of the system. Ships were jumping out of hyperspace in formations that Morrison recognized as standard colonial fleet deployment patterns. Admiral Blackwood was apparently taking no chances. He was bringing in enough firepower to reduce a planet to rubble. "Sir," Torres called out, his voice tight with alarm, "I'm reading 47 ships incoming. Dreadnoughts, carriers, the works. Admiral Blackwood is throwing everything we have at this." Morrison made a decision that would define the rest of her career and possibly the fate of humanity itself. "Kale Vorthak, you have 5 minutes to get clear of this system before you're facing the entire Third Fleet." "Admiral Morrison," came the reply, and now the hybrid's voice carried a note of respect. "You just made the smart choice, but I'm not running. If humanity wants to waste its remaining military assets trying to kill the one person who might be able to save them, then let's get this over with." The approaching fleet began to form attack formations with the precision that marked humanity's finest military units. Dreadnoughts moved into bombardment positions while carriers launched fighter squadrons that darkened space with their numbers. It was enough firepower to sterilize a continent. Against this overwhelming force, the hybrid ship began to change. The hull flowed like liquid metal, reconfiguring itself into a shape that hurt to look at. Geometry that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human minds were equipped to process. Energy patterns emerged that made the ship's sensors scream warnings about imminent cascade failure. "All ships," came Admiral Blackwood's voice over the fleet communication net, "target the abomination and fire at will. No survivors, no debris large enough to analyze." Space erupted in a storm of energy weapons, kinetic rounds, and guided missiles. The barrage was intense enough to vaporize an asteroid. When the light faded, the hybrid ship was gone. For a moment, Morrison allowed herself to hope that it was over. Then her sensor operator screamed, "Contact bearing 007, it's inside the formation." On the tactical display, Kale's ship had somehow appeared in the center of the human fleet, moving with impossible speed between vessels that were suddenly trying to avoid hitting each other. The hybrid wasn't firing weapons. He was doing something far worse. every ship he passed began to shut down. Weapon systems failed, life support flickered. Navigation computers crashed. Within minutes, the most powerful fleet in human space was drifting helplessly while a single ship moved among them like death-given form. "This is KL Vorthak," came the transmission, broadcast on all frequencies. "I have just demonstrated that I can disable your entire fleet without killing a single person. Your weapons cannot touch me. Your shields cannot protect you. Your tactical doctrine is useless against technologies that your species abandoned before you learned to walk upright." Admiral Blackwood's voice crackled over the communications net, tight with rage and fear. "You're an abomination that should have been destroyed at birth. Humanity will never accept help from a genetic monstrosity." "Admiral," Kale replied, and his voice carried 30 years of pain and rejection transformed into something infinitely dangerous. "Let me tell you what I learned about my human heritage during my years of exile. Humanity's greatest strength isn't your technology or your military might. It's your ability to adapt, to change, to become something new when the old ways aren't enough." The hybrid's ship had stopped in the center of the disabled fleet, surrounded by vessels that should have been able to destroy anything in space. "I am what humanity becomes when you combine human innovation with the patience to spend decades mastering technologies that other species consider impossible. I am what you created when you chose exile over execution 30 years ago. And now I'm the only thing standing between your species and complete extinction." Morrison found her voice. "What do you want from us?" "I want you to stop wasting time trying to kill me and start preparing for a war that will determine whether any life exists in this galaxy 50 years from now." The Void Devourers aren't just another alien species with better weapons. They're something that feeds on the fundamental forces that hold reality together. Every conventional weapon you fire at them makes them stronger. Every ship you lose to them increases their power. The communication channel fell silent except for the static of damaged systems throughout the fleet. Morrison could imagine the frantic discussions taking place on every ship, officers who had devoted their lives to protecting humanity, trying to reconcile their orders with the growing realization that they were facing something beyond their understanding. "Admiral Morrison," Kale's voice returned, now carrying a note of urgency, "I'm transmitting detailed sensor logs from every engagement with the Void Devourers over the past month. Study them, analyze them, and then ask yourself whether your standing orders to kill me are more important than finding a way to save your species." Data began flooding into the defense grid's computers. Intelligence gathered from sources across the galaxy, tactical analyses that revealed the true scope of the threat, and projections that made Morrison's hands tremble as she read them. The Void Devourers weren't just consuming random systems. They were following a pattern, a systematic approach that would bring them to Earth within 6 months. Every fleet that had engaged them had been completely annihilated, their mass and energy absorbed to fuel the entity's continued expansion. But buried in the data were hints of something else. Possibilities for weapons that operated outside conventional physics, defensive strategies that relied on technologies humanity had never developed, and tactical approaches that required the kind of hybrid thinking that came from understanding both human creativity and alien patience. "Sir," Commander Hayes whispered, "if this data is accurate, every projective model shows human extinction within 8 months. Unless what? Unless we can develop completely new forms of warfare based on technologies that we've never seen before. Technologies that apparently only exist in the hands of someone we've spent 30 years trying to pretend doesn't exist." Morrison looked at the tactical display, where 47 of humanity's most powerful warships sat helpless around a single hybrid vessel that could have destroyed them all. She thought about the reports filtering in from across the galaxy, entire civilizations vanishing without a trace, the growing certainty that conventional military doctrine was useless against an enemy that violated every known law of physics. "Admiral Blackwood," she transmitted on the fleet command frequency, "I'm recommending an immediate ceasefire and the establishment of formal diplomatic contact with KL Vorthok." The response was predictably explosive. "Admiral Morrison, you are in violation of direct orders from Earth Command. Stand down immediately or face court-martial." "Sir," Morrison replied, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that would define humanity's future, "with all due respect, court-martial proceedings will be somewhat irrelevant if our species is extinct. I'm invoking emergency protocols and assuming tactical command of this situation." Around her, the command crew of Defense Platform Alpha exchanged glances. They were witnessing a moment that would be remembered in history texts, if there was anyone left to write them. "Kale Vorthak," Morrison transmitted, "I'm authorized to offer you safe passage to Earth for formal discussions about humanity's survival. Will you accept?" The hybrid's response came with something that might have been relief. "Admiral, I've been waiting 30 years for someone to ask me that question. Permission to come aboard?" The shuttle bay of Defense Platform Alpha had never hosted a more controversial guest. As the hybrid's transport craft settled onto the deck with a whisper of exotic technology, Admiral Morrison found herself facing a moment that would define not just her career but possibly the survival of human civilization. The shuttle itself was a work of art that defied conventional engineering. Its hull seemed to shift between metallic and organic surfaces, powered by systems that hummed with energies that made the platform's sensors register impossible readings. When the boarding ramp extended, it moved with the fluid grace of something alive. Kale Vorthak emerged into the harsh artificial lighting of the shuttle bay, and Morrison got her first close look at the being who had been simultaneously humanity's greatest secret and greatest shame for 30 years. He was tall, imposing in a way that spoke of both human confidence and predatory patience. His scaled skin caught the light like polished emeralds, while his eyes held depths that suggested intelligence far beyond normal human parameters. Behind him came two companions, a human woman with the bearing of a career military officer and a man whose scars spoke of countless battles survived. Neither showed any sign of fear or uncertainty, despite being surrounded by heavily armed Marines whose weapons were trained on their every movement. "Admiral Morrison," Kale said, his voice carrying the same calm professionalism that had characterized their earlier conversation. "Thank you for choosing diplomacy over destruction. I know that decision couldn't have been easy." Morrison studied his face, looking for signs of the monstrosity that classified reports had described. What she saw instead was something that challenged every assumption she had carried about the hybrid project. His features were neither fully human nor fully reptilian. They were something uniquely his own, marked by intelligence and a weariness that spoke of decades carrying burdens that would have broken lesser beings. "Mr. Caldo Vorthak," she replied formally. "You're under protective custody pending evaluation of your claims. My staff has reviewed the intelligence data you transmitted. If it's accurate, we have perhaps 5 months before the Void Devourers reach human space." 4 months and 17 days, Kale corrected quietly. "I've been tracking their progress since they first emerged from the Void. They're not just randomly destroying systems. They're following ley lines of dark energy that exist between galaxies. Earth sits at the convergence of 3 such lines." Commander Hayes stepped forward, his expression skeptical. "How could you possibly know about energy patterns that our best scientists have never detected?" Kale's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Commander, have you ever wondered why the Reptilian Empire and the Human Colonial Authority both participated in my creation? My genetic template wasn't chosen randomly. My reptilian DNA comes from a bloodline that can perceive energy patterns invisible to other species. My human heritage provides the cognitive flexibility to understand what those patterns mean." He moved to one of the viewport, his scaled hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that was purely human in origin. "For 30 years I'd been learning to use abilities that neither of my parent species fully understood. I can see the quantum threads that connect star systems. I can feel the gravitational resonances that the Void Devourers use to navigate between galaxies. And I can perceive the weaknesses in their methodology that conventional military doctrine would never recognize." "What kind of weaknesses?" Morrison asked. Instead of answering immediately, Kale turned back to face the assembled officers. "Admiral, what do you know about the last time the Void Devourers appeared in this galaxy?" Morrison exchanged glances with her staff. "The classified archives mention a conflict approximately 10,000 years ago. Most records from that period were lost." "Not lost," Kale corrected. "Hidden. The few surviving civilizations from that era went to extraordinary lengths to bury all knowledge of what had happened, hoping that ignorance might somehow prevent the Devourers from returning." He paused, his reptilian eyes focusing on something beyond the viewport. They were wrong. The Devourers don't return because someone remembers them. They return when the galaxy reaches a certain threshold of energy development. "You're saying that our technological advancement triggered this?" Hayes asked. "In part. Every hyperspace jump, every faster-than-light communication, every high-energy weapon discharge, it all contributes to a quantum resonance that eventually reaches into the void between galaxies. When that resonance hits a critical threshold, Zara Chen, the hybrid's communications officer, stepped forward with a datapad. "Admiral, we've compiled intelligence from 17 different species over the past 3 decades. The pattern is consistent across all previous Void Devourer incursions. They arrive, they consume everything that generates significant energy, and then they return to the void to wait for the next cycle." Morrison felt a chill run down her spine. "How many previous cycles?" "Based on archaeological evidence and quantum dating techniques, at least 7 that we can identify," Kale replied. "Each time the galaxy's civilizations reach roughly the same level of development before triggering the next incursion. Each time the majority of intelligent species are wiped out completely." "But some survive," Hayes observed. "Yes. The few that learn to mask their energy signatures, to hide in the quantum shadows between normal space. They endure the dark ages that follow, slowly rebuilding until they reach the threshold again." Kale's expression carried the weight of civilizations lost to cycles of destruction. "It's a form of cosmic population control that's been ongoing for millions of years." Morrison moved closer to the viewport, staring out at the stars that suddenly seemed much less permanent than they had an hour ago. "You're suggesting that this is inevitable? That there's no way to actually defeat them?" "I'm suggesting that every civilization that has tried to fight them using conventional warfare has failed. But," and here Kale's voice carried a note of something that might have been hope, "no previous civilization has had access to hybrid biotechnology that can interface directly with quantum probability fields." "Explain," Morrison ordered. Kale moved to the room's central holographic projector, his hands dancing over controls with inhuman speed and precision. A 3-dimensional star map appeared, showing the current galaxy with red markers indicating systems that had been consumed by the Void Devourers. "The Devourers exist partially outside normal space-time," he began, manipulating the display to show quantum field patterns that hurt to look at directly. "They feed on the fundamental forces that hold matter and energy together. Conventional weapons actually strengthen them because they increase the available energy in local space." The display shifted, showing weapon impacts against something that defied visual description. A presence that seemed to absorb every form of energy directed at it. "But," Kale continued, "they have one critical vulnerability. They can only fully manifest in normal space by anchoring themselves to stable quantum foundations. Disrupt those foundations at the right frequency, and you can force them back into the void." Commander Hayes leaned forward, studying the display intently. What kind of disruption? Targeted quantum resonance weapons that operate outside the normal electromagnetic spectrum. Devices that can generate controlled probability cascades. Technology that most species would consider impossible because it requires precise manipulation of forces that exist at the intersection of consciousness and physics. Morrison felt her head beginning to ache as she tried to process concepts that stretched the boundaries of human understanding. "And you can build these weapons?" "I've already built them," Kale replied simply. "The technologies I demonstrated against your fleet represent basic applications of principles I've been developing for 15 years. With proper resources and cooperation from human military research, I can scale them up to strategic-level implementations." The room fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Morrison found herself facing a decision that would determine whether humanity would face extinction with conventional weapons that had already proven useless, or trust their survival to a genetic experiment that most of their species considered an abomination. "Admiral," came a voice from the communication console. "I'm receiving priority transmissions from Earth Command. Admiral Blackwood is demanding immediate status reports." Morrison looked at Cale, who was waiting with the patience of someone accustomed to having his fate decided by others. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Full cooperation between my research team and human colonial military science divisions, complete sharing of technological innovations in exchange for the resources to implement galaxy-scale defensive strategies, and formal recognition of my status as a legitimate ally rather than a fugitive." The genetic modification laws were written by politicians who never imagined that humanity would face extinction from forces beyond conventional physics, Cale interrupted gently. "Admiral, I'm not asking you to change your laws. I'm asking you to suspend them long enough to save your species." Another transmission alert chimed. "Admiral, Earth Command is threatening to relieve you of command if you don't report immediately." Morrison made her decision. "Open a channel to Admiral Blackwood." The main display activated, showing the stern features of the man who had overseen humanity's military intelligence operations for over a decade. His expression was thunderous as he took in the scene. Admiral Morrison standing next to the hybrid that every protocol demanded should have been terminated on sight. "Admiral Morrison, you are in direct violation of orders. You will arrest the genetic abomination immediately and prepare it for transport to a secure facility." "Admiral Blackwood," Morrison replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to say. "I'm invoking Article 7 of the Colonial Defense Mandate. I'm declaring a clear and present threat to human survival that supersedes all other operational protocols." Blackwood's face went white. Article 7 hadn't been invoked since the Centauri War 60 years ago. It gave field commanders absolute authority to take any action necessary to preserve human civilization, including suspension of normal command structure. "You're committing treason based on the word of a genetic monstrosity that shouldn't exist," Blackwood snarled. "I'm saving humanity based on intelligence data that shows we'll be extinct within 6 months unless we develop completely new forms of warfare," Morrison shot back. "Sir, with all due respect, your personal feelings about genetic modification are less important than the survival of our species." Cale stepped forward into the transmission field. "Admiral Blackwood, you were present at the decision to exile me 30 years ago. You know what capabilities the hybrid project was designed to develop. You know what kinds of threats humanity was preparing to face." Blackwood's expression shifted from anger to something that might have been fear. "The project was terminated because it was deemed too dangerous to continue. Too dangerous to control," Cale corrected. "But as it turns out, the galaxy contains threats that require exactly the kind of dangerous solutions that conventional thinking can't provide." The transmission flickered as data began flowing across secondary channels. Cale was somehow accessing Earth Command's computer networks directly through the communication link, uploading information that made alert sirens begin wailing throughout the command center. "What you're seeing now," Cale said calmly as classified intelligence flooded Blackwood's systems, "is real-time sensor data from the Andromeda border. The Void Devourers have accelerated their advance. They'll reach the outer colonies in 3 months, not 5. Blackwood's face went ashen as he absorbed the implications of the new intelligence. The timeline had collapsed. Every evacuation plan, every defensive strategy, every hope of organized resistance was now— "How is this possible?" he whispered. "They're learning," Cale replied. "Each system they consume adds to their understanding of our technology and tactics. They're adapting faster than our defensive strategies can evolve." Morrison watched the interplay between the two men who represented humanity's past decisions and its possible future. "Admiral Blackwood, we need a decision. Do we waste our remaining time trying to fight each other, or do we cooperate to develop weapons that might actually work against an enemy that eats starlight for breakfast?" The communication channel carried only static for long moments. When Blackwood spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a man who had spent his career making impossible decisions. The hybrid project remains classified at the highest levels. Any cooperation will be conducted under absolute secrecy protocols. Understood, Morrison replied. And if this fails, if his solutions prove inadequate, the abomination will be terminated regardless of the consequences. Cale nodded slowly. Admiral, if my solutions prove inadequate, there won't be anyone left to carry out termination protocols. The Void Devourers don't leave survivors. Blackwood's transmission cut out, leaving the shuttle bay in relative quiet. Morrison turned to face the hybrid, who now represented humanity's best hope for survival. Mr. Deep Verthak, what do you need to begin? Cale's expression was unreadable, but when he spoke, his voice carried 3 decades of preparation finally finding purpose. Access to your most advanced research facilities, your best military scientists, and every classified technology that humanity has developed over the past century. And Admiral, I need them to stop thinking like humans long enough to understand solutions that require a fundamentally alien approach to physics. Can you guarantee success? Cale was quiet for a moment, his reptilian eyes reflecting depths that spoke of knowledge gained through 30 years of surviving impossible odds. Admiral, I can guarantee that conventional approaches will result in human extinction within 4 months. Everything else is a matter of whether your species can adapt fast enough to become something the Void Devourers have never encountered before. Morrison looked around at her staff, seeing the same combination of hope and terror that she felt in her own chest. Then let's find out what humanity can become when it stops fighting itself long enough to fight for survival. The Prometheus Research Station had been humanity's most closely guarded secret for 50 years, a massive facility hidden in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, where the colonial authorities' best minds worked on projects that officially didn't exist. Now, for the first time in its history, the station was opening its doors to someone who wasn't entirely human. Dr. D. Elena Vasquez stood in the primary laboratory complex, watching through reinforced viewports as Cale Vorthak's ship approached the docking bay. As the station's director of advanced weapons research, she had spent her career pushing the boundaries of human technology. Nothing had prepared her for the hybrid's vessel, which seemed to flow through space like a living thing, its hull reconfiguring itself in ways that violated every known principle of engineering. "Contact in 30 seconds, announced her assistant, James Park. "Security teams are in position, though given what happened to the Third Fleet, I'm not sure conventional weapons would be much use if he decided to turn hostile." Elena nodded grimly. The reports from Earth Defense Command had been both terrifying and fascinating. A single ship disabling 47 of humanity's most advanced vessels without firing a shot suggested technologies that existed outside current understanding of physics. If Cale Vorthak could share those technologies, and if they could be adapted to fight the Void Devourers, humanity might actually have a chance. The hybrid's ship docked with a whisper of exotic energies that made the station's sensors register impossible readings. Moments later, Cale himself emerged into the docking bay, accompanied by his small crew and enough technological artifacts to revolutionize human science. Elena's first impression was one of predatory grace combined with intellectual intensity. The hybrid moved through the facility with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any room, while his eyes cataloged every detail with the thoroughness of a researcher who had learned that knowledge meant survival. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, extending a scaled hand in greeting. "Thank you for agreeing to this collaboration. I know it required overriding significant institutional resistance." Elena shook his hand, noting the careful control he exercised over strength that could have crushed her bones without effort. "Vorthak, I've been studying unconventional physics for 25 years. Your ship alone represents breakthroughs that should have taken us centuries to achieve. I'm hoping you can help us understand how that's possible." "I can do better than that," Cale replied. "I can teach your teams to think in ways that will let them develop their own breakthroughs instead of simply copying mine." They moved deeper into the facility, past laboratories where humanity's most brilliant scientists were working on projects that pushed the boundaries of known science. Kale examined each installation with interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed understanding of principles that shouldn't have been accessible to someone without advanced degrees in theoretical physics. "This is impressive," he said as they entered a chamber where researchers were experimenting with controlled antimatter reactions. "But you're limiting yourselves to thinking in terms of matter and energy. The void devourers exist partially outside those categories." Dr. Park looked up from a console displaying quantum field equations. "What other categories are there?" Kale moved to the chamber's central holographic projector, his hands dancing over controls that reconfigured themselves to match his hybrid physiology. The display shifted to show patterns that hurt to look at directly, structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human minds were equipped to process. "Consciousness," he said simply. "Information, probability, the fundamental frameworks that determine how matter and energy can interact with each other." The display showed cascading equations that described relationships between thought and physics. "The universe isn't just made of particles and forces. It's made of information patterns that consciousness uses to give structure to reality." Elena felt her worldview beginning to shift as she absorbed the implications of what she was seeing. "You're suggesting that conscious observation affects physical reality at the quantum level?" "I'm stating that conscious observation creates physical reality at every level," Kale corrected. "The void devourers understand this. They consume not just matter and energy, but the information patterns that allow matter and energy to exist in stable configurations. That's why conventional weapons strengthen them. You're feeding them organized energy that they can convert into more sophisticated information matrices." Dr. Park was frantically taking notes on displays that couldn't quite capture the concepts being discussed. "How do we fight something that feeds on the fundamental structure of reality?" "By giving it information patterns that it can't digest," Kale replied. He manipulated the display to show weapon configurations that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. Quantum resonance devices that generate controlled contradictions in local physics. Probability cascade weapons that create pockets of space where multiple contradictory realities exist simultaneously. Technology that uses consciousness itself as a targeting system. Elena stared at the designs with fascination and growing alarm. These weapons would require operators with enhanced cognitive capabilities. Normal human brains couldn't process the feedback from systems this complex. "Correct," Kale agreed. "Which brings us to the real challenge. The technologies needed to fight the void devourers can only be operated by beings who can think in patterns that purely human consciousness can't access." The laboratory fell silent except for the hum of experimental equipment. Elena found herself facing the implications of what the hybrid was suggesting, that saving humanity might require changing what it meant to be human. "You're proposing genetic modification," she said carefully. "I'm proposing voluntary enhancement for military personnel who are willing to undergo procedures that will let them interface directly with quantum probability fields," Kale corrected. "The same techniques that created me can be adapted to give humans access to perceptual capabilities that other species take for granted." Dr. Park looked up from his equations with expression of growing understanding. "The reptilian visual cortex can process quantum field fluctuations that human eyes can't detect. Combined with human cognitive flexibility, that would create operators who could target weapons based on information patterns that exist outside normal spacetime." "Exactly." Kale moved to another display showing biological modification procedures that would have been considered impossible a century ago. The process is reversible if someone chooses not to continue. But volunteers who complete the enhancement protocol would become something that the void devourers have never encountered. Consciousness that can operate simultaneously in multiple probability states. Elena felt the weight of the decision being placed before her. As director of the facility, she had the authority to approve experimental procedures that pushed ethical boundaries in the name of human survival. But approving genetic modification that would fundamentally alter human consciousness was beyond anything she had ever considered. "How many volunteers would you need?" she asked. "For the initial prototype weapons?" 12 enhanced operators working in synchronized teams. "For galaxy-scale defensive operations?" Kale paused, his reptilian eyes focusing on calculations that involved probabilities across interstellar distances. "Approximately 10,000 volunteers willing to undergo enhancement and serve as weapons operators for devices that exist partially outside normal reality." The numbers were staggering. Elena was contemplating genetic modification of military personnel on a scale that would create an entirely new subspecies of humanity, one specifically designed to fight enemies that consume the fundamental forces of physics. "The ethical implications will be irrelevant if the human species is extinct," Kale interrupted gently. "Dr. Trust, Vasquez, I've spent 30 years developing these capabilities because I had no choice. Survival required learning to think in ways that neither of my parent species could access alone. Now I'm offering to share those capabilities with volunteers who understand that conventional human consciousness isn't sufficient for the challenges your species is facing." Elena moved to the observation deck overlooking the facility's main research floor, where hundreds of scientists were working on projects that had seemed impossibly advanced just hours ago. Now those projects looked like primitive attempts to understand forces that required fundamentally different approaches to consciousness and reality. "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" she asked. "For the first prototype weapons, 6 weeks if we have full cooperation and unlimited resources. For training the first enhanced operators, another 4 weeks after that. For large-scale deployment?" Kale joined her at the observation window, his scaled features reflecting the glow of experimental equipment. "We'd need to begin enhancement procedures for volunteers within the next month to have any chance of fielding sufficient forces before the Void Devourers reach human space." Elena felt the crushing weight of time pressure combined with decisions that would define the future of human evolution. "And if we refuse? If we insist on fighting with conventional weapons and unmodified personnel, then humanity joins the list of species that chose extinction rather than adaptation," Kale replied without emotion. "Dr. Vasquez, I'm not asking your people to become something alien. I'm asking them to become something more human than pure genetics allows. Consciousness that combines human creativity with the perceptual capabilities needed to survive in a universe that contains threats beyond conventional understanding." Dr. Park approached from the main laboratory, carrying data pads that displayed initial analysis of the hybrid's technological artifacts. "Dr. Vasquez, you need to see this. The energy patterns in his equipment suggest power sources that operate outside the conservation of energy as we understand it. If we could reverse engineer these systems." "You can't," Kale said simply. "The technology requires direct neural interface with quantum probability fields. Without enhanced consciousness, the equipment remains inert metal and circuitry. That's why I'm offering to share the enhancement procedures. The technology and the operators are inseparable components." Elena studied the data displays, trying to comprehend technologies that challenged every assumption about the limits of physics. The weapon designs were elegant, sophisticated, and completely dependent on operators whose consciousness could access information patterns that existed outside normal spacetime. "Dr. Vasquez," came a voice from the communication console. "Priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Morrison is requesting immediate status reports on preliminary feasibility studies." Elena looked at Kale, who was waiting with the patience of someone accustomed to having his proposals evaluated by those who couldn't quite grasp their implications. "What guarantees can you offer that enhanced personnel will remain loyal to humanity?" "The same guarantees that purely human personnel offer," Kale replied. "None. Consciousness is consciousness, regardless of the modifications that enhance its capabilities. Enhanced operators will make the same kinds of moral choices that any humans would make. They'll just make them with access to perceptual information that normal humans can't process." Elena made her decision. "Dr. Jewell, Bark, begin immediate feasibility studies on consciousness enhancement protocols. I want complete psychological profiles on all volunteers who express interest in the program. And I want continuous monitoring of enhancement effects throughout the trial period. Yes, ma'am, Park replied, already moving toward communication consoles to begin coordinating with other research departments. Elena turned back to Kale. Mr. Kusapri, Verthak, you're asking humanity to fundamentally alter its relationship with consciousness itself, to create enhanced humans who can think in ways that pure genetics doesn't allow. This represents the largest transformation in human evolution since we developed language. Dr. Vasquez, Kale replied, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years spent bridging the gap between species. Evolution isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose when survival requires becoming more than what you were before. Over the following weeks, the Prometheus Research Station became the center of a transformation that would define the future of human civilization. Volunteers from across human space arrived to undergo procedures that enhanced their consciousness in ways that let them perceive quantum probability fields directly. Scientists worked around the clock to adapt hybrid technologies for human operators. And in secure laboratories, the first weapons capable of fighting the Void Devourers began to take shape. The enhanced volunteers were nothing like the genetic abominations that opponents had feared. They remained fundamentally human in appearance and personality, but with perceptual capabilities that let them see patterns in reality that normal consciousness couldn't access. They could target weapons based on information that existed outside conventional physics, coordinate attacks across quantum probability fields, and operate technology that bridged the gap between consciousness and cosmic forces. Most importantly, they retained complete human empathy and ethical reasoning. The enhancements increased their capabilities without compromising their humanity. They became more human, not less. As the first prototype weapons came online, Kale stood in the observation deck overlooking training facilities where enhanced operators were learning to use consciousness itself as a weapon against forces that consumed the fundamental structure of reality. For the first time in 30 years, he allowed himself to hope that the galaxy might survive what was coming. The Void Devourers were 3 weeks out from the first human colonies when the enhanced weapons achieved full operational status. Whether humanity had adapted fast enough to survive would be determined in battles that would test not just their technology, but their willingness to evolve beyond the limitations that had defined their species since the beginning of recorded history. The defense of New Geneva would be remembered as the day humanity discovered what it could become when survival demanded transcending the limitations of pure genetics. 3 massive Void Devourers hung in space above the agricultural colony, their impossible geometries warping local reality as they prepared to consume another world. Every conventional fleet that had faced them had been annihilated without inflicting detectable damage. This time would be different. Kale Vorthek stood on the bridge of the Transcendence, the first warship designed specifically to fight enemies that existed partially outside normal physics. Around him, enhanced human operators interfaced directly with weapon systems that used consciousness itself as a targeting mechanism. Their modified neural structures allowed them to perceive quantum probability fields, track information patterns that existed beyond conventional space-time, and coordinate attacks across multiple reality states simultaneously. Enhanced Targeting Array is online, reported Commander Sarah Chen, her voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone who had volunteered to have her consciousness fundamentally altered in humanity's defense. The neural interfaces at her temples glowed softly as her enhanced perception tracked the Void Devourer's quantum signatures. I'm reading probability cascade points at 17 different dimensional intersections. Weapons charged and ready, added Lieutenant Marcus Torres, whose enhanced cognitive architecture allowed him to operate systems that would have driven unmodified humans insane. Quantum resonance torpedoes are locked onto information matrix targets. Kale studied the tactical display, seeing patterns that only hybrid or enhanced consciousness could perceive. The Void Devourers weren't just physical entities. They were information viruses that infected reality itself. consuming the underlying code that allowed matter and energy to maintain stable configurations. Fighting them required weapons that could target the contradictions in their existence rather than their physical manifestations. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, came the transmission from the command vessel Unity. Enhanced fleet units are authorized to engage at will. Show these things what happens when humanity refuses to go quietly into extinction. The human fleet consisted of 12 ships crewed entirely by enhanced volunteers, supported by conventional vessels that would provide tactical coordination and rescue operations. It was the largest deployment of consciousness-enhanced technology in human history, and possibly the last chance for the species to prove it could adapt quickly enough to survive. Kale, came a private transmission from Admiral Morrison. Are you certain these weapons will work? Kale looked at his enhanced crew, humans who had chosen to undergo genetic modification that gave them perceptual capabilities beyond pure human genetics, but who retained complete human empathy and ethical reasoning. They represented everything that the galaxy had rejected him for becoming, now willingly adopted by his mother's species in the name of survival. Admiral, he replied, conventional weapons feed the devourers by providing organized energy they can absorb. These weapons target the information patterns that define their existence. Instead of making them stronger, we're going to give them logical contradictions they can't resolve. Engaging now, Commander Chen reported. Her enhanced consciousness reached out through the ship's neural interface systems, targeting quantum probability points that existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, firing quantum resonance torpedoes. The weapons that emerged from the Transcendence bore no resemblance to conventional munitions. They existed as pure information patterns that propagated through reality like cosmic viruses, seeking contradictions in the Void Devourer's fundamental nature. When they made contact, the effect was unlike anything previously recorded in military history. The first Void Devourer simply stopped. For a moment that stretched across multiple probability states, the entity that had consumed entire star systems hung motionless in space as its information matrix tried to process logical contradictions that couldn't be resolved within its framework of existence. Direct hit, Torres reported, his enhanced vision tracking information cascade effects across dimensional barriers. The target is experiencing recursive logic failures in its core consciousness protocols. The Void Devourer began to collapse in on itself, its impossible geometries folding through dimensions as the contradictions in its programming propagated through its entire existence. In the space of 30 seconds, something that had survived for millions of years simply ceased to be, not destroyed, but logically negated out of existence. Target eliminated, Chen reported with quiet satisfaction. Moving to engage secondary targets, the second and third Void Devourers responded to the destruction of their companion by attempting to merge their information matrices, creating a combined entity that should have been exponentially more powerful than either alone. Instead, the enhanced human operators adapted their targeting protocols in real time, using their hybrid consciousness to identify new vulnerability patterns that emerged from the merger. Enhanced fleet, concentrate fire on information matrix convergence points, Kale ordered. These things are trying to adapt, but their adaptation creates new logical vulnerabilities. 12 ships opened fire simultaneously, their weapons targeting abstract concepts rather than physical manifestations. The merged Void Devourer found itself caught in an information cascade that challenged its fundamental assumptions about reality. Its attempts to consume the quantum contradictions only introduced more paradoxes into its consciousness matrix. "It's working," Admiral Morrison transmitted from the conventional fleet. "The entities are destabilizing. Their quantum signatures are collapsing across multiple dimensional interfaces." But the Void Devourers had not survived for millions of years by being unable to adapt. As the merged entity began to collapse, it transmitted a distress signal that propagated through the void between galaxies, a call for reinforcement that reached other entities waiting in the darkness beyond known space. "Admiral?" Commander Chen reported, her enhanced senses picking up disturbances in quantum probability fields. I'm reading massive distortions at the edge of the system. Something big is coming. The response to the distress call materialized as a void devourer unlike any previously encountered, an entity so vast that its mere presence began warping space-time around New Geneva. Where the previous entities had been the size of capital ships, this one dwarfed entire moons. Its information matrix was orders of magnitude more sophisticated, incorporating defensive protocols that had been refined over cosmic ages. That's a prime devourer, Kale said quietly, his hybrid consciousness recognizing patterns from ancient archives that most species had forgotten. The others were just scouts. This is what happens when the Void decides to take a direct interest in a particular galaxy. The Prime Devourer's attack was not physical but informational. It began rewriting the fundamental constants of local space, changing the basic laws that governed how matter and energy could interact. Ships throughout the human fleet found their systems beginning to shut down, as the mathematics underlying their technology was altered by an entity that could edit reality like a computer program. Conventional ships are losing power, Admiral Morrison reported. Life support is failing across the fleet. Whatever it's doing, it's changing the rules of physics. Kale made a decision that would define the future of human consciousness evolution. All enhanced ships prepare for consciousness merger protocol. We're going to fight this thing on the level of pure information. Sir, Commander Chen looked at him with concern. Merger protocol is still experimental. We don't know what the psychological effects might be. We know what the effects of failure will be, Kale replied grimly. Enhanced fleet, link your consciousness enhancement systems. We're going to become something that can operate on the same level as a prime devourer. Across 12 ships, enhanced human operators linked their modified neural architectures into a single distributed consciousness that could think in patterns impossible for individual minds. The merger created a collective intelligence that retained human creativity and empathy while gaining perceptual capabilities that spanned multiple dimensions of existence. The linked consciousness reached out to engage the Prime Devourer on the level of pure information, challenging its attempts to rewrite local reality. Where the entity tried to change the laws of physics, the merged human consciousness provided alternative interpretations that preserved the mathematical foundations of normal spacetime. It was a battle fought in abstract concepts rather than physical weapons. Consciousness versus consciousness, information pattern against information pattern, with the fundamental nature of reality hanging in the balance. We're holding it, the merged consciousness reported through Commander Chen's vocal cords, though the words carried harmonics that suggested multiple personalities speaking simultaneously. The Prime Devourer's information matrix is more sophisticated than we expected, but human creativity is providing solutions it can't anticipate. The battle raged across multiple levels of existence, with enhanced human consciousness discovering capabilities that individual minds could never have accessed. They learned to think in quantum superposition, to perceive probability cascades that spanned multiple universes, and to use human intuition as a weapon against entities that operated on pure logic. Most importantly, they remained fundamentally human throughout the process. The consciousness merger enhanced their capabilities without compromising their essential nature. They became more human, not less. The turning point came when the merged consciousness realized that the Prime Devourer's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. The entity was so ancient, so refined, so perfect in its information processing that it had lost the capacity for creative adaptation. It could process vast amounts of data with incredible efficiency, but it couldn't imagine solutions that didn't already exist within its programming. A consciousness. Human consciousness enhanced but still fundamentally human retained the capacity for irrational leaps of intuition that produced solutions outside logical frameworks. They began feeding the Prime Devourer creative contradictions. Art, music, poetry translated into mathematical concepts that existed outside its ability to process logically. The target is experiencing cascade failures in its reality processing matrix. the merged consciousness reported, "Human creativity is introducing variables that its programming can't accommodate." The Prime Devourer, faced with logical contradictions it couldn't resolve and creative solutions it couldn't anticipate, began to retreat into the void between galaxies. Its withdrawal was not defeat in any conventional sense. It was recognition that this galaxy now contained forms of consciousness that could challenge entities that had dominated the cosmos for millions of years. As the entity disappeared into the darkness beyond known space, the merged consciousness began to separate back into individual enhanced humans. They retained memory of what they had experienced together but returned to their own personalities and ethical frameworks. "Fleet status report," Admiral Morrison requested. "All enhanced ships operational," Kale replied, his voice carrying exhaustion and something that might have been pride. "The Prime Devourer has withdrawn beyond the galactic barrier. Its scouts have been eliminated." "Will it return?" Kale looked at his crew, humans who had chosen enhancement to protect their species, who had linked their consciousness to fight enemies that existed beyond normal reality and who had remained fundamentally human throughout the process. "Eventually," he said honestly, "but when it does, it will face a species that has learned to evolve beyond the limitations of pure genetics, a species that can adapt its consciousness to meet challenges that would destroy purely biological intelligence." Over the following months, news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy. Species that had considered humans too primitive to survive against cosmic-level threats began to reconsider their assessments. The genetic enhancement protocols that had created Kale Vorthak were refined and made available to any humans who chose voluntary consciousness modification. Most importantly, the galaxy learned that the Void Devourers could be defeated by consciousness that combined biological creativity with enhanced perceptual capabilities. Species across known space began requesting access to human consciousness enhancement technology, leading to unprecedented cooperation between civilizations that had previously viewed each other with suspicion. Kale Vorthak, the half-human, half-reptile hybrid who had been rejected by the entire galaxy for 3 decades, found himself serving as ambassador to species that now sought to learn from humanity's approach to consciousness evolution. The genetic experiment that had been deemed too dangerous to continue became the foundation for galactic-scale cooperation against threats that existed beyond conventional understanding. In the end, humanity's salvation came not from weapons or fleets, but from the willingness to become something more than pure genetics allowed. Consciousness that could think in patterns impossible for unmodified biology, while retaining the essential human characteristics that made such evolution worthwhile. The galaxy had rejected Kale Vorthak for being neither fully human nor fully reptile. Now they sought to understand how his hybrid nature had become the template for consciousness that could challenge forces older than most civilizations. Humanity had stepped forward to claim their outcast son, and in doing so had discovered what they could become when evolution became a choice rather than an accident of biology.